Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. And yes, this is the Two Brothers map, and yes, that means exactly what you think it means. There's going to be a middle rush, and things are going to get emotional. The star of today's show is EULA Lawrence here. We're going to call him Larry, because why the hell not? And he is in the Italian Tier 9, believe it or not this is a cruiser, the Michelangelo. When this design was proposed, it was meant to be a battleship. And yet, well, certainly from the view that we saw from the front, it looked like it had a couple of 152mm gun turrets. And it does. It has 3 turrets, actually. 2 at the front, 1 at the back, and they're quad turrets for a grand total of 12 152mm guns, which is a fairly respectable armament for a light cruiser. But look at the size of this thing. This isn't a light cruiser, is it? Well, no, it isn't. Have a look at midships. There are another pair of quad turrets. Those are 320mm guns. This thing has 8 320mm guns, 12 152mm guns, and 20 90mm guns, with the 152 and 90mm guns being the secondaries. These things here, midships, are the main gun batteries, 10-inch or 320mm guns, and all of the guns fire semi-armor piercing. This is what makes the Michelangelo unusual. Well, there are a couple of things that make the Michelangelo unusual, but the placement of the main gun batteries is the main thing, because, I mean, those are big guns by cruiser standards, and it has 8 of them. But in order to get them firing at a target, you do have to expose an uncomfortable amount of broadside. And despite the size, this thing is a cruiser. Cruisers, as we all know, are crunchy on the outside and chewy on the inside. So there are a number of factors in play here, but mostly the positioning and firing angles of those 2 midship 320mm turrets that make the Michelangelo particularly unsuited for doing a middle rush on Two Brothers, especially right at the start of the match. Because while you can see that some of the enemy team have managed to work their way around the flanks, all of the big hitters, the battleships, the slower ships on the enemy team, are still going to have firing angles on anything coming out of the northern end of that central channel by the time we get there. So you're basically sailing straight into a crossfire. A crossfire of, well, based on what's available on the enemy team, the Iowas, the North Carolinas, is mostly going to consist of a lot of super heavy 16-inch armor piercing. And the Michelangelo is a cruiser. Crunchy on the outside, chewy on the inside, but worse, she's a cruiser with this really unusual main gun battery placement, which essentially requires the captain of the Michelangelo to get broadside to whatever he's shooting at in order to be able to fire the main guns. But maybe, as long as nobody knows he's coming, oh dear. Well, the enemy Lexington spotted them already, so there's absolutely no element of surprise coming here. Fortunately, because there is always a bright side, it spotted them with torpedo bombers, and thanks to the constraints imposed upon attack aircraft by this narrow channel with steep mountains on either side, it's forcing the Lexington's torpedo bombers to release their payload from either straight ahead or straight behind. It can't do a side attack, the mountains are in the way. So that's good, I suppose. Of course, if the Lexington comes back with dive bombers, yeah, there's nowhere to maneuver for the ships. So, well, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Oh, and here it comes with dive bombers. Oh well, never mind. Well, the enemy team know they're coming. This can actually be a good thing if you're doing a middle rush on Two Brothers, because what can happen is that instead of working their way around the flanks and actually trying to win the game, a lot of the heavy hitters on the enemy team, which isn't necessarily just the battleships, anybody armed with torpedoes, big opportunity to get some big damage done here as well. They tend to loiter around here by Cap Circle Alpha rather than pushing their way around the flanks, just waiting here to smack 7 different shades of shit out of whoever's dumb enough to force their way through the middle. And that does appear to be the case here. So this should give the rest of the team the opportunity to roll the flanks up The lightning's trying to smoke them up, but, well, it's completely ineffective for two reasons. One, they've just been hydroed, probably by the Carno over there, and two, with guns of this caliber, the second they open fire, they're going to get spotted anyway. And those are some seriously big angry ships over there. The Zeton, the North Carolina, the Iowa. They have some serious firepower. Yep, that hurt. Not as much as it probably should have. The Lightning's gotten some very effective torpedoes away against the Carno. No idea why the Carno thinks it's a good idea to sit there, though. I mean, that's one of the few French cruisers that does not actually come with torpedoes. If he was a torpedo cruiser, this would make sense, but he isn't, so it doesn't. And guess what? Michelangelo has torpedoes. Very unusual Italian torpedoes. They're actually pretty fast, as opposed to your typical Italian torpedoes that, well, in some cases are actually slower than some Italian destroyers. But not so with Michelangelo's torpedoes that actually have a speed of 72 knots, although the range is only 8 kilometers. He's popped the high-speed smoke, and it's been 20 seconds since he fired the 320mm guns at the Carno, so he is undetected, and it's here where the secondaries and the torpedoes start to come into their own. Because don't forget, the smoke firing detection penalty only applies to your main battery guns. Your secondaries can blaze away from inside a smoke screen without revealing your exact location. A couple of things to note here. We'll come back to why he has the top grade gunner skill in a moment, but right as he scores his second kill, knocking out the enemy Zeton, and yeah, he is the only member of his team thus far to have achieved any kills whatsoever. His team have just suffered their 6th casualty. But the amazing thing is that neither he nor the Prinz Ruprecht, who sailed up the middle with him, are among those casualties. I mean, the Lightning's dead, and the Prinz Ruprecht is about to die. But Larry, for some bizarre reason, he's still going strong. The Prinz Ruprecht has just gone down. The team have now suffered 7 casualties. There's only 5 of them left alive, and this battle isn't even 10 minutes old. They have just inflicted their 3rd casualty on the enemy team, but Larry is still going. Back to that top grade gunner skill, which you can see he has active. Oh, and there's his 3rd kill. And it was a close quarters expert award. So that was actually a secondary kill. And this is something else that I want to talk about with regards to the Michelangelo, and another reason why, aside from the really, really odd main gun battery placement, this is a very unusual ship. And it's to do with the secondaries. Generally, you do not build for secondaries on Italian ships. There are very few exceptions to this rule. The Michelangelo is one of them. And the reason why you don't build for secondaries on Italian ships is because generally Italian ships, battleships and cruisers, most of their secondaries are 90mm guns. And 90mm secondaries are utter trash. Oh, hang on a second, I think he's about to nail that Seattle. Oh man, the Seattle's nailing him back. Don't know why the Seattle is continuing to fire high explosive when he's got a broadside cruiser to shoot at. Oh well, it's his funeral. Death by semi... Yeah, there it is. Right. So yes, why are 90mm secondaries trash? Mainly it's because they just don't have enough penetration to actually damage anything. 90mm high explosive can only penetrate 15mm of plating. And even tier 8, 9 and 10 destroyers have 16mm of plating. Plus the superstructure of most of the targets you're going to be shooting at, with some very, very rare exceptions, British light cruisers for example, is also going to be at least 16mm thick. So 90mm high explosive, almost a complete waste of time. Now, the Michelangelo secondaries are, of course, semi-armor piercing and not high explosive. So the 90mm secondaries, and it does have 20 of them in 10 twin turrets, they do get a little bit more penetration than high explosive, but still they're pretty bad. Plus, they cannot set fires because they're not high explosive. They aren't going to cause blast damage to nearby ship modules because they're not high explosive. And they also don't benefit from the IFHE skill because they're not high explosive. But the Michelangelo doesn't just have 90mm secondaries. It's got 12 152mm secondaries. And they're primarily the ones that are giving that enemy destroyer such a hard time. Yeah, he's not having a lot of fun there, is he? There it goes. So why the top grade gunner skill, which has just gone inactive, by the way? And it's gone inactive because there are no longer any enemy ships within range of his secondaries. You see, what the top grade gunner skill does is it reduces the reload of your main gun batteries if there are any enemy ships within range of your secondaries. And the Michelangelo's secondaries they do start off with a reasonable range of 7 kilometres. Now, because the Michelangelo is a cruiser, it doesn't get an option for any of the battleship captain skills, which increase the accuracy of the secondaries. But you can still fit equipment modules and take skills that increase the range of the secondaries. Now, Larry hasn't done that, and you can tell just by looking at the range circles on the minimap. His secondaries do still have the default 7 kilometre range, but he has taken the top grade gunner skill, which means that if there are any enemy ships within 7 kilometres, and they do have to be spotted within 7 kilometres, he gets a reduced reload on these 320mm semi-armour piercing spitting guns. That enemy Lexington is proven to be a bit of a pain in the arse. I think Larry is probably going to want... Yeah, he's detected by aircraft again. There it goes, the high-speed smoke. Michelangelo's an Italian cruiser. It gets exhaust smoke, which allows it to move at full speed rather than quarter throttle and still remain hidden. And because he is more than 12 kilometres away from the Iowa over there, I mean, I don't know exactly what the smoke firing detectability penalty is for 320mm guns in a smoke screen, but it's more than that, because he is able to hit the Iowa without being spotted. And don't forget, the smoke firing penalty only applies to ships within detectability range. The Lexington can be circling this smoke screen with as many aircraft as it likes. It's not going to see him shooting out of it. So this has given him a bit of breathing space, enough time to get a heal off and recover at least some health. Unfortunately, well, it's not all bad news. I mean, we have just lost the Groningen. The team are now down to 2 surviving members, Larry here and the Minnesota over there. Oh, there goes the high-speed smoke. That's another spot of bad news, but at least the Groningen managed to take care of the enemy Yugomo. And it looks like the Minnesota, by some miracle, has managed to avoid most of the Yugomo's torpedoes. Lexington's coming back with the torpedo bombers, but look where it's attacking from. It picked the one spot of land that it had to fly over, which means he's going to have to drop those torpedoes very, very close in order to clear the island. Larry sees it coming, deliberately steers into the torpedoes. The only one that hit him didn't have time for the fuse to arm, so he's managed to dodge the first set of torpedoes. The Lexington's coming back with dive bombers, which is bad because... well, he did have to run into the island, so he's going to struggle to dodge these. And the Michelangelo's AA is not great. Although the Lexington is cycling its squadron so quickly it doesn't have time to fully replenish them, so there's at least that. Meanwhile, I'm praying that the Minnesota down to the southwest does not try to go for a ram on the Iowa. He has the health advantage. If anything, you'd expect the Iowa to try to be the one ramming the Minnesota. Because... oh, that was a big hit. More of those, please. Because, well, the enemy team have the numbers advantage. That would leave just Larry left alive on his team, and the Iowa did start that fight on lower health than the Minnesota, so it wouldn't be a terrible trade. Torpedo bombers coming back again. Larry tries to turn into them, and it's slightly less successful this time, although he does manage to take the first torpedo before the fuse could on, but he does take a hit from one. There's the AA Defence Expert Award. That's not the kind of medal that you expect to get in an Italian cruiser, let me tell you that for nothing. But he's taken out the carrier. They still got some rocket attack planes left, though. And the Minnesota did not go for a... and he's taken out the Iowa. Good job, Minnesota. He actually finished him with his secondaries as well. And again, didn't see that one coming. And something that Larry didn't see coming. He's there in chat. How did you lose this? Don't get too confident, Larry. They haven't lost it yet. I mean, it's a good question to ask because, you know, at one point, I think barely 7 minutes into the battle, Larry's team were down 7 kills to 2. And one of those kills, Larry's team even managed to lose their carrier at the 6-minute point. I mean, don't ask, right? But the enemy team, even though they only have 1 ship left, they are by no means losing this battle. They have... well, they had 3 of the 4 cap circles. Larry's busy flipping the cap here at Alpha in order to buy him and that severely beaten up Minnesota some time. But the enemy team do still have a North Carolina, and he has 2 kills to his name, and we have no idea how many hit points he has remaining. Larry and the Minnesota, however, well, the Minnesota has 10,000 hit points, and Larry doesn't even have that. Yeah. Larry firing the guns there. He wants to see if he gets detected to know whether or not the North Carolina is sneaking up the flank there to the west. Didn't get detected, so he knows the North Carolina isn't doing that. He's managed to flip the cap. All this is going to do, though, is buy the team a little time, because they're going to need time to find and sink that North Carolina. And they will have to sink the North Carolina, because that North Carolina, as well as having possession of 2 of the cap circles, also has a 500-point lead with 5 minutes of the battle to go, which means, back of the napkin calculation, unless something drastic happens in the next 3 minutes, that North Carolina is going to win on points. But where is he? That's the question. Didn't look like he was chasing the Minnesota around the western flank. Sincerely hope he's not lying in ambush down here waiting for a repeat of what Larry pulled off at the beginning of the battle, but there's no real reason to suspect that he would. He basically could be anywhere. And he doesn't need to find and kill anybody in order to win. Larry, however, does. And he's got less than 10,000 hit points. And he's in a cruiser that has to give broadside to get the main gun batteries firing. Oh, okay. Well, we know where he is now. He's over there in Cap Circle Alpha. Of course, now the North Carolina knows exactly where Larry is as well. Well, he doesn't know it's Larry. He knows there's somebody down here flipping the cap at Charlie. But it could be Larry, it could be the Minnesota as far as the North Carolina is concerned, and I'm not honestly sure which would be better for him because the Minnesota does not have a lot of health. Okay, he knows it's Larry now. North Carolina put up his spotter plane. So Larry's spotted. I mean, he's not just detected, he's spotted. The North Carolina can see him, can't shoot at him because he's in the other cap circle with the island in the way. But he knows it's Larry, and he knows Larry's coming. If you have a look at the minimap, you'll see that the Minnesota is doing his level best to turn around and come around the northern side of the island, but, well, he's a Minnesota. It is not a fast battleship. So even with Larry slowing down to ensure that he manages to take this cap circle, just in case the worst happens and he doesn't survive what's coming next, the Minnesota is just too slow to be any assistance. So here's the thing. Larry does need to kill the North Carolina. Oh, and the North Carolina's coming this way. That's not good. Well, it's not terrible either, because if the North Carolina kills him, that's 1,000 points and game over. And obviously if Larry kills the North Carolina, that's the last surviving ship on the enemy team, and regardless of the points, that's also game over. But while Larry is just in a cruiser and the North Carolina has several 16-inch armor-piercing friends that can all move a hell of a lot faster than he can, Larry has one final trick up his sleeve. He's got one charge of that high-speed smoke left. And remember, your secondaries can blaze away, as can your torpedoes from a high-speed smoke screen without giving your precise location away. I mean, the North Carolina knows he's coming because there's a very angry smoke screen charging towards him at 30 knots, spitting out 6-inch semi-armor piercing shells. And he's now within assured detection range, so he now can definitely see him. But even though he's on 972 points, 975 points because the North Carolina clutched his main gun batteries the second he had the first shot at Larry and didn't kill him. Yep. You know, despite the dubious start, I mean, who takes a Michelangelo up the middle on Two Brothers? That was very, very well played. I mean, look at the awards. What do we got? There's Air Defense Expert, Strike Team, Confederate, 2 Close Quarters Expert Awards, Dreadnought, in a cruiser, Kraken Unleashed, Coordinated Attack, High Caliber, and General Offensive. 7 kills in total. More than 3,000, substantially more than 3,000 base experience, which is phenomenally good. And I'm curious to see just exactly how much damage his secondaries did, because generally speaking, Italian battleship and cruiser secondaries are trash. But today in the Michelangelo, 412 hits, despite being in a cruiser and therefore unable to take the battleship skills that increase the accuracy of the secondaries, and they did 116,000 damage. They did slightly more than half the 229,000 damage that Larry did today. Wow. You know what they say, kids? If it's stupid but it works. And on that bombshell, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, take care. And I'll catch you next time.